Rachel Maddow is the person you're talking about with the Civil Rights Act review, and he announced his candidacy on her show. So he had obviously found her to be a trustworthy person.
Again, had he told me, I'd have said don't do that. Pick a news show. Find somebody who's a legitimate, honest, professional news person.
A legitimate look at my old friend Dick Armey, coming up in just a moment. The mythical Caribbean walrus, already one of the most powerful symbols of failure to emerge from the BP oil disaster, just became an even more powerful symbol. For those of you keeping track at home, the mythical Caribbean walrus came into being when he was discovered on BP's regional oil spill response plan for the Gulf of Mexico. This response plan, the one specific to the Gulf of Mexico, included walruses and a list of animals that might be affected by a spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Walruses, of course, only live in super cold places and don't actually exist in the Gulf of Mexico. Apparently, the folks at BP had just copied and pasted their oil spill response plan for the Gulf of Mexico from a response plan they'd already written for somewhere else, somewhere cold. Aside from being really embarrassing for BP, that fact also gave us all a clue as to why the company's Gulf of Mexico actual response, not plan, but real response, has been so underwhelming. But it turns out BP does not have a corner on the cut and paste, just fake it oil spill response plan market. It's not even the only company that includes the mythical Caribbean walrus in its Gulf of Mexico oil spill response plan. Congressman Ed Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts, called on executives from the nation's top 5 oil companies to testify on Capitol Hill yesterday. Before they arrived, Congressman Markey checked into each of their Gulf of Mexico oil spill response plans and found something truly remarkable.
These 5 companies have response plans that are virtually identical. The plans cite identical response capabilities and tout identical ineffective equipment. The covers of the 5 response plans are different colors, but the content is 90% identical. Like BP, 3 other companies include references to protecting walruses, which have not called the Gulf of Mexico home for 3 million years. 2 other plans are such dead ringers for BPs that they list a phone number for the same long-dead expert.
Not only do they all have cribbed, cut and pasted, ineffectual response plans for the Gulf, they all have the same cribbed, cut and pasted, ineffectual response plans for the Gulf. Do you believe this? Apparently, once upon a time, years ago, somewhere cold with walruses, someone from the oil industry actually sat down and thought about responding to an oil spill. And no one has thought seriously about it since. They're all industry-wide just turning in that one response plan over and over and over again, like a test they bought on the internet. But there is a silver lining here. The oil industry is filing this bogus 90% identical, nothing to see here oil spill response plan with the federal government because that's all the federal government has been requiring them to file. There is a reason the oil companies are treating their oil spill response plans for the Gulf of Mexico like a formality. And it's because that's the way the government has been treating it, too. Government expectation creates industry response, uniform industry response. It works when government expectations are dramatically low. Could it also work if government expectations were high? Joining us now is Congressman Ed Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts, chairman of the Energy and Environment Subcommittee. Congressman Markey, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you for having me on.
How did you discover that these plans were basically identical?
Well, by the time you've read, if you're given a 5-book assignment, and by the time you're halfway through the second book, it reminds you of the first book, and then the third book, and the fourth book, and the fifth book are all identical. You don't really have to be Dick Tracy to figure it out that the only new technology that these oil companies had invested in was a Xerox machine. And the amount of thought which they put into preparing a response plan was exactly equal to how much MMS, the federal agency, had required them to put in, which was exactly 0. So each one of them figured out that they could pretend that they could drill in ultra deep waters, but they didn't have to have an ultra safe technology or an ultra-fast response in the event that something went wrong. And so this is just, unfortunately, the problem that exists because of the cozy cooperation between MMS and this incredibly successful oil industry.
And is there a flip side to that low expectations being met with low performance coin? If the government, if the MMS was a real agency and actually regulating the oil industry and had high expectations for what the companies had to prove before they'd be allowed to risk all of us by drilling in deep waters and off American shores, if there were high expectations, could they really raise the bar in terms of what's expected from these companies on safety?
Of course they could. If the cop on the beat is in fact threatening to punish severely an oil company because they are running the risk of endangering the entire Gulf Coast, I think there's no question that they would have seen a response. But after a while, this boosterism led to complacency, and the complacency always leads to disaster. And the complacency which was allowed to be created inside of the oil industry resulted in fact, no response plans being put in place that could be effectuated in a timely fashion. And by the way, every one of the oil companies conceded that point at the hearing yesterday.
Congressman Markey, in terms of America's big energy issue, in terms of our overall orientation to energy, I know you co-authored the energy bill that passed in the House last year. When the president gave his Oval Office address last night, did you want to hear more specifics from him about what he wants the Senate to pass? Do you feel like his leadership is pushing things as fast as they can be pushed right now?
Well, you are right. Congressman Waxman and I, along with Speaker Pelosi, passed the most historic energy and climate bill ever to go through the House of Representatives. That was last June 26th. We have been waiting for the Senate to act. I think what President Obama did last night was to lay out a plan for victory. He called on the country to move towards wind and solar and biomass and geothermal, all electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, doubling the efficiency of all new buildings in our country. He laid it out. Now the challenge is to repeat this message day after day until it gets done before Election Day. I think if this challenge is not only issued last night, but repeated on a daily basis, we will, in fact, have this final victory that we need to move to a clean energy agenda. And I think last night was the turning point. It was the battle plan for success on an agenda which will change our relationship with fossil fuels forever.
Congressman Ed Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts, thank you so much for your time tonight, sir. I know you're very busy right now. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me on again.
Okay, most of the time, my reaction to a President Obama speech is, wow, good talker. But after last night's oil disaster address, my reaction was not like Congressman Markey's. It was more like, this isn't working for me. Get me rewrite. So I rewrote. We will bring you my completely unauthorized, reprioritized Take Two version coming up.